absolutely. And you know, I mean, there's a lot of interest with U.S. and China can collaborate, and there's a lot of things that we can work together. But now, and as China now, you know, GDP is also getting larger, but also it seems that maybe with a number of years, China may surpass US on the GDP status, but maybe per capita still far behind. But what do you think about, you know, this? How can we really now, you know, accept each other, maybe coexist with each other peacefully? We cannot. You know, I remember probably you said before that, you know, the U.S. has a system that fits U.S. China has a system that fits China. We should not really try to change each other or something. Can we really reach that kind of a common understanding, or maybe how we can do that?
I mean, I'll give you an example. The topic of Afghanistan came up. My brother, President George W. Bush, and his wife, my sister-in-law Laura, have very strong feelings about their concerns for the rights of women and children in Afghanistan. With the Taliban coming back into control, there was a small military force there that helped support the Afghan troops of 2,500 or so. I'm not quite sure of the numbers, but very small compared to what's on the Korean Peninsula today. And it seems to me that for civilized nations around the world that are concerned for the rights of these women and these children that may be, you know, thrown back into the dark ages or the stone ages through this change of leadership, that civilized nations would be motivated to work together to keep a presence there to maintain the stability. The American people are kind of tired of being the sole, what's perceived to be the sole protector. There were allies there, but not in great forces. But the American people elected Biden with his promise to withdraw. President Trump made the commitment to withdraw. A better strategy would have been to say, let's get countries from all over the world, people that have a notion of what it is to be civilized, and find our common humanity and work together, you know, to secure the rights of the people of Afghanistan, not to nation build, but to be protectors of those basic human rights. So that may be idealistic and naive, but I do believe we're going to get there. The world is becoming so connected, so close, so, you know, there's everything is far more transparent than it has been in the past. And so where there's a wrong that needs to be righted, we need to work together to right that wrong.
Well, yeah, I think that's exactly, I think the more communication and as I said, you know, the visit of each other is so crucial. As a matter of fact, I mean, Xinjiang now is really welcoming foreigners to visit. I mean, so because of the COVID, we really hope that more people come to Xinjiang and visit that. And that probably will clear things up, as you said.
I've been to Xinjiang twice, by the way, not recently, but I've been there twice and
okay, we really enjoy. You come back again. We'd love to show you around again. Yeah, please, yes. So David, what's your take on the question about how we can really, you know, can we really coexist peacefully together, and maybe gradually accept each other's differences? Because, for example, this COVID-19, China has been managing well with China basically putting a lot of community interest on individual interest, whereas U.S. is really emphasize human rights and cannot violate, and that the whole society actually has less freedom, whereas China probably individually you suffer a bit, but the whole society gained a lot of freedom and right on that. So what's your ideas on that?
Well, Henry, thanks. That's a great question. And let me just say, first of all, back on the topic of energy, I want to make a quick point, and then I'll come to the broader and very important topic that you've raised in terms of how we can, you know, go forward together. On energy, just to amplify some of the really good points that Neil made, you know, we at the Bush China Foundation care a lot about the issue of energy. We've been advocates for an idea that we coined, called the U.S.-China Energy Free Trade and Investment Agreement, or USEFTIA, or FTIA, as we call it. And the U.S.-China Energy Free Trade and Investment Agreement is an idea that we are advocating, that we're building out, and that we hope we can advocate for the implementation of. And it's a very simple concept at the conceptual level. And it's exactly what Neil said. In terms of energy, the United States has it, China needs it, so let's do it. It's pretty simple. We can genuinely create a win-win in the energy area. And our idea is take energy out of the trade war, fast track it for a more robust trade and exchange, and create the legislative and policy context and regulatory predictability so that the infrastructure investments, Henry, that you mentioned can be made, and so that we can export, for example, liquefied natural gas, which Texas has in huge abundance, to China, which has said that it wants to double its liquefied natural gas consumption over the next 10 years or so, and move from 7% of the energy mix to 15%. It's a perfect scenario where we can sell something that we have, China can buy something that it needs, we can put a Texas-sized dent in the US deficit for those who care about that, just as Neil said exactly correctly. And everybody walks away a winner, and America walks away a winner, but the state of Texas really walks away a winner, and others that produce liquefied natural gas. It's an obvious idea. The reason that we don't see the kind of trade in that area is because of the legislative policy and regulatory unpredictability that we have seen surge in the last several years. Nobody wants to make the investment of billions or tens of billions of dollars that would allow this trade to occur in terms of terminals that can deal with liquefied natural gas and so on. And the bottom line is this is an easy one and we ought to do it. So we've been advocating that. And just very briefly, we've also advocated for the idea of the United States and China actually working together, governments, former government officials, business leaders, nonprofits, and others, to come together to mitigate the impact of energy poverty in the developing world, and specifically in what we might term the bottom billion, to use the term that was coined by others, by another author. And to one of the big problems among the 1/7 of the population that is least fortunate or poorest is energy poverty. And so what can the United States and China do together to alleviate and mitigate the impacts of energy poverty on that segment of the global population? We're working with the Rockefeller Foundation on a really interesting project in that area. But Henry, to your broader point, I think the one thing I just want to say is that those of us, I think, who understand China well and who've lived there, been there many times, et cetera, understand something that we don't often say, but that I think is true. And that is, a number of the differences between the United States and China are simply irreconcilable, period. We are never going to see eye to eye on those issues. We're never probably going to see eye to eye on the issue of Taiwan, for example. China has its view, the United States has its view. The views are essentially irreconcilable. We're not going to see the issue of the South China Sea the same way. China has its long-held view. The United States and many other countries have a very different view. We're not going to get to a point where we have a meeting, come away from it and say, hey, now we agree on it. So there are some irreconcilable, and by the way, same for Hong Kong, same for the issue of human rights and a number of other issues. So the point is, given that there are differences that will always be part of the fabric of the relationship between our two countries, how do we manage the relationship in light of that? And I think the view that Neil and that I and that the Bush China Foundation and other moderates in the United States, the few of them that seem to be out there at this time, is it can be done. We can have a business-like and a functional, constructive, results-oriented, mutually beneficial and politically sustainable relationship, even with those differences being unreconciled. And we ought to aspire to do that. And rather than say, look, because we disagree on all these different profound issues, let's take our ball and go home. We advocate the opposite. We advocate, Neil advocates, I advocate, the Bush China Foundation, for the idea that this is all the more reason that we need to come together with a problem-solving mindset. So that's what I would say. I think it can be done. It just requires the vision that George H.W. Bush had, the vision that Neil has as our founder and chairman, and the vision that we seek to give expression to at this foundation. It's possible to do. We're going to keep doing everything we can to move in that direction. And I know that there are many in China that feel the same way, and many in America as well. And we're going to continue to stand strong for that sensible, common sense, moderate perspective on how to move this relationship forward.
Thank you, Neil and David. Actually, you made a lot of worthwhile notice point. I think that you are right. We should probably really maximize the commonalities, the common ground, and minimize the differences. Of course, as you said, because of the culture, historical, and geographically, all those big differences. There are some differences probably will remain for a long time to come. But definitely, we have such a huge interest, a common interest, not only for the both countries but for the world, that we should really work together so that we can really avoid a catastrophe or maybe a hot war. I mean, these days we had a lot of populism and nationalism on the rising on both sides, and that is really dangerous. I think we, as you said, moderate but maybe cool heads and realistic. I think we need more people like that in both places. So absolutely important. Now my staff was telling me we had live from several portals. We have over 200,000 viewers watching us and listen to us. And but we had also collected some questions from online viewers as well, media as well. We have a few questions, so I just read them out. And we have one question from CGTN. Basically, was saying, in which area that can China and U.S. cooperate among the pandemic area? I think we already probably covered some of that. But what do you think of Biden's Afghanistan policy? And can China and the U.S. work together in Afghanistan, and how? Those are from CGT. And then we have another two from China News Agency. Regarding the investigation of origin of virus, some argue that there's more politics into that rather than the scientists into that. And so what do you thought on that, how we can get out of that? And how should China and US cooperate on fighting against a pandemic? So basically they've been linger on those questions that we touched upon briefly. Perhaps you could give your answer to that as you see fit. And maybe Neil, and then we'll have David. But of course, with the question we just covered before.
I'll start on the last question you raised about the origins of the virus. I'm not as concerned, for example, about the origin of climate change, whether humans cause climate change or whether it's a natural occurrence or whether it's some combination. The fact is there's climate change and we need to address it. And there's clearly a role for the US and China and all the nations of the world to lock arms in addressing it. China's got its 2060, carbon neutrality pledge. The governments at all levels, the private sector will be unified in their effort to do that. And I have no doubt that China will be major players in the collaboration to try to address climate change. I mean, the same thing kind of rings true to me with the virus. Who cares where it originated, whether it originated, in a lab or from a bat or from the United States or from wherever it originated, who cares? The fact is we have a pandemic that continues to affect the lives of hundreds of thousands of people all across the globe. And there's a pressing need for mature, civilized nations in the world to work together. And so David may have more specific ideas on how we can work together, but it seems like collaboration is very natural when it comes to something as big as this and the origins of it. And I will put a little, caveat that I reject the idea that there was some malicious effort to release a virus, a virus that causes a pandemic. I think that's a crazy notion that there was some intent from one side or the other, to do this on purpose. So you throw away the crazy conspiracy theories, and just assume that there was an origin of some kind. Doesn't matter where it originated. Let's deal with it together.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. I mean, we can't find where AIDS originated. Well, some say in Africa, some say in America. Who cares? I mean, let's cure it. Let's find a cure for that. And
Exactly.
also, I mean, how would it be so silly for Chinese to invent a virus and the cure itself is started in China? It doesn't make sense. Yeah. So it's a huge cost.
Sense.
Yeah. So David, what's your answers to those questions?
Yeah, well, thanks, Henry. And let me just start by saying I completely agree with what Neil just said, that the idea that this was something that was unleashed upon the world with intentionality is ludicrous and just not a serious idea. Why would a country unleash something on itself and everyone else that it trades with and so forth? It just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, again, there are areas, I think, within the context of COVID-19 and pandemics more generally that we ought to work on together. Let me make one point at the outset, which is COVID-19 is not going to be the last pandemic that we as a world ever face. I mean, we know that. There will periodically be pandemics. They'll originate here, they'll originate there, meaning this country, country A, country B. And we will have to cope as a global community with pandemics forever, periodically. And so learning how to work together and to actually solve medical and public health and epidemiological problems is a good thing for our countries to be able to do. I think we were able to do that to a greater degree when the relationship was less politically charged than it is at present. And we've gotten away from it, but it's unfortunate for all of us that is so. And rather than focusing on the blame game and demonizing and so forth in any direction, just as Neil said, and as I said earlier, we should have been focused on solving the problem right at the outset. I'll be honest, as I've said, and I said in the Global Times, one of China's prominent newspapers, back in May of last year, that I think both the United States and China first chronologically and the United States second chronologically because of the way that the pandemic developed, didn't respond in the earliest stages of COVID-19 to the pandemic with the openness, the transparency, or the sense of urgency that we should have. And I think we can do that in the areas of research and development, vaccine, comparing notes on what's working, what's not working, bringing medical practitioners and public policy experts together around the issue of the Delta variant, specifically helping each other as we did in the early stages in both directions with providing materiel, personal protective equipment. That was a good thing to do. I'm glad that we as a foundation were a part of that along with many others in both directions. So there are a lot of things that I think we can do, but fundamentally focusing on solving a public health challenge rather than politicizing a medical issue and a public health issue is what we need to be focused on. On the issue of Afghanistan, I think there is clearly an opportunity now because of, unfortunately, the tragic circumstances in the country with the Taliban retaking Afghanistan. There is an opportunity and I think a need for the United States and China as players that have significant interests in Afghanistan coming together and really talking to each other honestly about what we're thinking about the situation, what our assessments of the situation are, what our plans are as individual countries relative to how each country intends to engage Afghanistan going forward. And I think there's a lot that could be done to exchange views. And in fact, the Bush-China Foundation this October, in less than 2 months, will be bringing people together on this topic to kind of get a conversation started. And I'm sure others will be doing that as well. But I think anytime there's a global crisis or a global challenge, The two countries, among others, that have to be at the table are the United States and China as the two largest economies, two members of the P5, permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations, major global players with presences across economically and in terms of development politically across the globe. And Afghanistan is a clear case where I think there's benefit to sitting down and saying, what do you think about what's happening there? And here's what we think about what's happening there. Just at that level alone, there's utility. So, you know, all of these are areas where I think there is room for improvement. I hope that we'll see that improvement because, as I've often said, the United States cannot be all that it was meant to become without China. And China cannot be all that it was meant to become without America. We need each other, whether we like it or not, we do. And we've got to get this relationship right because the consequences of getting it wrong are far-reaching and very unpleasant.
Great. Thank you, Neil and David, both for voicing such a very clear message. I think that is really very stimulating for people in both countries and probably to the world as well. I think you're absolutely right. We really need to concentrate on working together in solving the pandemic problem and the challenges and preventing the future pandemics. As you said, it may not be just this time, it could come again. And we really have to work together as a human race rather than as a country. So probably we should have a summit of some kind, or maybe WHO should convene the big countries together to really work out some recommendations for how to work together. Very importantly, I think that is really facing the whole countries in the world. And of course, Afghanistan, I agree with Neil that probably even before the last evacuation, the U.S. should get every country work together. We could talk, have a country in the region and have a discussion. Maybe we could have the UN to play more active role, or even have a UN peacekeeping force to safeguard the evacuation to prevent future disasters. So there's many things we could talk. Absolutely, we need to bring all parties together. So now, given the time, we probably come to the conclusion of our dialogue. I think we started with this dialogue with the 50 years of U.S.-China exchanges. Started with, of course, with the Nixon visit 50 years ago. Started with China joined the UN when George H.W. Bush as a U.S. UN ambassador then, and had the, Neil was mentioned that they had a really great encounter then with the Chinese delegation, but also with the legacy of both presidents. I mean, President George H.W. Bush, but also George W. Bush as well. I mean, George Jr. President as well. I think that the legacy is have more exchanges, more dialogues, more understanding of each other, and then also maybe we should try to avoid major disasters and deterioration, and we should really seek the common grounds and minimize the difference. So maybe just in concluding words from both of you, what's your final message to our audience here in China, maybe also around the world, that given the 50 years of anniversary of exchanges between China and U.S., with China joining the UN for 50 years, with China, first secret visit by Dr. Kissinger to China 50 years ago, and also with the two presidents of Bush, maintaining, promoting, and strengthening the ties during those past years. How can we look forward, and how can we really going forward, given this, Bush, both President Bush, that's really proud of. I'm very honored to have Neil Bush the dialogue with us. Your family is really probably, one of the greatest in history that produced the two presidents of the United States. That now you have a Bush Foundation to still working on Bush China Foundation. That shows that the family is really care about this relationship. So we want to hear the last word from Neil, and also from the president of CEO of Bush China Foundation, David Firestein. So Neil, why don't you go first?
Well, thank you, Henry. I think I'll start by reiterating that my father often said, publicly, openly said, that the bilateral relationship between the United States and China was the most important bilateral relationship in the world. And it was prescient of him to say that many years ago, because it's becoming more true now than ever, given the gravity of the issues that we face, as humans on Earth. I would further say that globalization has been given the United States economy, our GDP, and our individual wealth, a huge shot in the arm. Our biggest partner in the world of globalization has been China. So the United States has been a beneficiary of trade, as imperfect as it is, as David pointed out, with all of its warts. This trade relationship has benefited our country tremendously. And there's no doubt that China has been an enormous beneficiary of our trade relationship as well. And as we've had more and more cultural exchanges and student exchanges, there have been millions of Chinese visitors to the United States. They all happily go home to China. There's, it's not like there's something restraining them from getting back into their home or their desire to go home. But the reality is that we've benefited tremendously from this bilateral relationship. And so the past, to me, is what we should look to kind of predicting the future. The future is going to be even better. And we've come into this kind of crazy time where China's rise is all of a sudden being recognized by politicians as a threat to the United States. And once we can get over the hurdle that China doesn't represent a threat of to our national security or to our economy or to our freedoms or to our basic way of life, then and through dialogue we'll establish better understanding and more cooperation. So I pledge to continue to work with David and our team at the Bush China Foundation to do whatever I can to help speak truth and shed light on this very, very important relationship in a way that hopefully will allow for greater collaborations across the board, not only on all these major issues, but on basic things that are taking place day to day. Our governments at all different levels should be having meetings to share and to better understand, to put ourselves in the other guy's shoes, and to create a better, more peaceful and harmonious world as a result.
Thank you very much, Neil. Yeah, David, please, your last word.
Well, Henry, thank you so much. And let me just conclude by saying, again, it's been an honor to be with you. And this is such a wonderful platform. And we're just grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation. President George H.W. Bush brought incredible vision to the U.S.-China relationship. And fundamentally, he asked himself a question about the relationship that was different than the kind of thing that we're seeing today. Today, political figures are sort of saying, where is the relationship going to be 15 minutes from now when I do my next tweet? And what President George H.W. Bush asked was, where do I want this relationship to be in the service of the interests of our nation 50 years from now and 100 years from now? And that farsightedness, that ability to kind of pay less attention to the headline of the moment and more attention to where this relationship could go over the long haul, that was a hallmark of President George H.W. Bush. And that's what we carry forward at the Bush China Foundation, the notion that what's happening today is less important than where this relationship is ultimately going to be. And we fundamentally believe, as Neil has noted, and as we've said in this conversation, that the U.S.-China relationship is the single most consequential bilateral relationship in the world. It matters to America. And of course, it matters to China as well. And we've got to get it right. And we have to think in terms of the long term, because the turbulence that we're seeing today will not always be with us. Yes, there will always be disagreements and differences in perspective on some pretty important issues. But the tonality shifts from time to time. The way that we think of different countries can shift based on what's happening in the world. And we're looking at the long-term interests of the United States. That's the angle that we're coming at this relationship from. The final thing I want to say, Henry, is I think we as Americans need to do a better job as a whole people and as a nation in recognizing the validity and the truth of two statements at the same time. Number one, China is the most formidable competitor that the United States will ever have in the lifetimes of every American alive today. And the reverse of that is true as well. But it is also true that China is an indispensable partner to the United States, whether we like it or not. And America is an indispensable partner to China. We have a stake in each other's future, and we need to be able to work together with that in mind. And I think if we can recognize that there is truth to both of those ideas, and by the way, competition is not a bad thing. Competition is what has made the world what it is today. It's generated progress. It's generated the better mousetrap. It's generated technological innovation. So yes, we compete, but yes, we must also cooperate. We understand that at the Bush-China Foundation, and I couldn't be more privileged and honored than to have the opportunity to be Neil's partner in carrying forward the legacy of someone for whom I have extraordinary reverence and respect, President George H.W. Bush.
Thank you, David, for your really impressive remarks in the last conclusion. Yeah, I think that half century is really it's long, but also it's short. But I remember when I saw the photos when George H.W. Bush, president, was riding bicycle in Beijing. He was and Neil was such a young age. I'm a teenager then. Now we are all getting senior, getting old now. So what has happened in the last half century has really remarkable. China become, from the one of the poorest country now become one of the second largest economy. That's incredible. I think I agree with you. China US is indispensable from each other and really need each other. So how can we come together and continue our efforts to maintain such a relation? I think the Bush-China Foundation has done a remarkable job, and also CCG is also, we are trying to become a bridge between China and outside world. So I hope that we'll continue our dialogue, we'll continue our discussion, but also we'll have those rational, have those reasonable, and also more human touch between our two countries. So Neil, that your father and your brother came to the Beijing Summer Olympics, and I hope that the Winter Olympics in the next February we'll have you come again for the Winter Olympics. We hope that we'll have those sports, people-to-people exchange, student exchange, tourism, and all the other program that can revive. We really, as David said, we cannot separate from each other. We have a huge bond, and let's continue the legacy of the both Bush president. So thank you so much, and thank you for our viewers, so many of them tonight, and also around the world. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.